Hey, what's up, friends? Thanks for coming back to the channel and joining me on this journey as we continue to build our Blazor web application with a C# API backend. So if you remember from the last video, what we did was we added all of this error boundary stuff, and the idea was to give the user a little bit more information about errors that were happening on the back end. Well, just in general, I guess, but here's what we've got. So, of course, our API is working just fine. As you can see, we can get all of the rooms. If we just do this, try it out, execute real quick, you can see that all of our rooms do show up, in fact. So the AI or the API is working, but on the front end, we added this error boundary section right here. And what we did was we kind of messed things up in our controller, or sorry, our service on the front end. And what we did is we just added an extra S here for the API/rooms. It's supposed to be API/rooms with one S, and because we added this extra S in here, it's basically going to fail that call. So when we call to it, it gives us an error. Down here at the bottom is the default. But if we go to home and reload to get rid of that, we also added the component of rooms into the counter, and then it gives us this sorry something has gone wrong message instead, which is, in my opinion, a little bit better. And you can style this how you want. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. But what I want to talk about today is something a little bit more important. And what that is that the idea behind error catching is that you're not supposed to really just kind of blanket catch errors. I mean, you can for sure. Like, this is totally okay, no big deal. But the idea is that as a developer, you want to kind of think about what kind of errors users could potentially encounter. So what we've done is we've built an error into our application already here at the service level. And this error basically means that we're going to end up with a 404 error not found, because essentially what's happening is as we call out to the API, it's going to return that something hasn't been found. So, when we call out to the API, essentially what's going to happen is the API doesn't have that particular endpoint available, because its endpoint is going to be just rooms with one S. And because that isn't there, our service throws an error. But what we want to do is we want to actually anticipate this a little bit better. And what that means is that we want to build that into the application so that users don't necessarily have to reload every time an error comes up, or just get a generic error. Maybe we want to see actually more information about the error, because if you're a developer and you're developing for a web application that users are going to be using, they may report to you like, hey, I got an error. But that one error that we already made that says, sorry, something's gone wrong, that's just generic. And so if they tell you that, you're like, I don't know what actually happened. So what we want to do is we want to build into this something a little bit more robust, something that can be give us a little bit more information. So I'm going to start here in the controller itself, or sorry, not the controller. I keep saying the controller. The service, the room service on the front end. So if you're following along at home, I'm going to minimize the API here in the front end. I'm looking at let's see where we're at. I'm looking at the services, and specifically I'm looking at the room service right there. So that's where I'm at. So open up that file, and we're going to make use of something called a try-catch block, all right? So it's going to look something like this. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to say, hey, code, try this, okay? And then if it doesn't work, then I want you to go ahead and catch, and we're going to catch what's called an exception as EX, and then that exception will be thrown. And we'll get into a little bit more about all those details in just a second. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to take this piece of code and I want to move it up here. So essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, try doing this. So make a var response, and you're going to await the HTTP client.getAsync and look for this endpoint in the API. All right. And so with that, we can actually put a little bit of logic in here for error checking. So we're going to, first of all, we're going to check to see if the response.status code is equal to system.net.http status code no content. So the first thing we're going to look for is to see if there's any content being returned at all. So this would be a good error for in the event that we try to call out to the API and we do get to the endpoint, but there are no rooms available there. All right. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to, because we don't want it to like error out or anything, we're going to return just an example, just a sample enumerable dot empty of the room DTO. All right, so essentially what we're doing here is we are just going to return an enumerable, which is what we are returning anyways, enumerable of room DTO, but we're going to return an empty one of them. All right, so that when the room base calls it, right here, when it calls the get rooms, it's trying to save it into this rooms object right here. Okay, so we're already declaring it as an empty enumerable. We can actually get rid of this if we want to, and it will be just fine, because now what's going to happen is it's going to put it into this, it's going to already call out there, and when it doesn't get anything, it's going to immediately make it an empty enumerable. Okay, it's just going to return that. So it will populate it with something, and we'll have something there. Okay, so that's the first kind of error that we could potentially encounter, is where there's no data being returned. Otherwise, though, if it does in fact work, then we're going to, let's see, we're going to go ahead and take this and we're going to put it right up in here. So if this does work, then go ahead and do that, what we were doing already, to return the content.read from JSON async, the IEnumerable room DTO. So that should work just like that. And I think what I want to do is actually, I'm thinking, let's see, I want to, I missed a part here. You know what? Because look what's going to happen. What I've got here is I've just got checking for the status code if it's that, otherwise return that. But that's not really what I want to do. I want to actually check for one more thing. So I'm going to enter down here, and I'm going to say if the response dot is success status code. That's what I want to do first. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to see if I'm actually getting some sort of an actual response from the API, because I might not. So this is going to kind of like be the gatekeeper. And so what'll happen is I'll await this response. If the response does have a success status code, as in it's successful, it gets some sort of response, but the status code is no content found, then I'll return the empty IEnumerable. Otherwise, we should be in this territory here within this section. So let me add that right there. So I'm going to move that there. So sorry if that was a little confusing for you. I totally forgot about this is success status code section, but I want to response.is success status code first to check to see that I'm getting some sort of response. Then I'll check to see if that response has no content. If it does, I'm going to return an empty enumerable. Otherwise, I will return what I got, and that should work just fine. All right. Now what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of error checking here after this. So here I'm looking to see if the response status code is successful. But let's say it's not. Let's say that we're not getting a successful status code being or responding to us. So I'm going to add that in here as a another option. Now, what you can do is you can kind of get yourself bogged down in all kinds of different possible status codes being returned. And I don't want to necessarily do that, but I am going to look at the ones that most likely could happen. So HTTP status code.not found, which I know in this case is a little bit different than no content. No content, of course, is just going to be empty. Not found is going to be a 404 error. And so that is going to be something that gets triggered by this particular bad endpoint call, right? And you'll see what that looks like in a second. So I'm going to say var ex for exception equals, we're going to make a new exception. There we go. Now in the exception, I can actually add a message. So I'm going to do some string interpolation here and say, let's see, because I have the response, I'm going to say the response.content, and then I'm going to put a dash between it and the next part, which is going to be the response.status code. Now, we already know that this status code should be 404, or basically, you know, not found. But the user isn't necessarily going to know that. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the message contains both the content of the response and the status code that it is getting. All right, and then we're going to throw the exception. So what that's going to do is it's going to transfer the code operation down to the catch block. Let me delete some lines here. It's going to transfer down to the catch block with this EX exception object. Right, so it's going to send it right here, and then what I can do is some stuff with it. So let's see. I think what I want to do is I want to be able to send the error message out to the page. So I'm going to actually add a new field up here at the top, and I'm going to say private read only. Actually, no, I'm going to say I don't want it to be private. I want it to be public because I want to be able to access it on the page. So I'm going to say public string error message, and it's going to be get set. There we go. And we're going to make it equal to something to start off, so we have something there. All right. I don't know what this nonsense is. I'm just going to ignore it right now because it doesn't seem to be breaking anything. We're good. Back down here, I'm going to look at my catch block, and I'm going to say error message, the thing that I just created, is going to be equal to ex.message. Okay, so the message that comes in from that thrown exception. And then, oh, you know, one other thing that we can do actually is I'm going to do this real quick, because when we're running it, you can actually see the error codes also in the output down here at the bottom, and I'll show you that too. So I'm going to, down here, I'm going to say private read only, and yep, it already knows an iLogger of, but actually what I want to do is I want to make this an iLogger specifically of the room service type. There we go. That's it. And that's what I'm looking for. iLogger of logger. And then I'm going to go ahead and tell it to make sure you, let's see, logger, whoops, not HTTP client. Sometimes Visual Studio thinks it knows what I want to say, but not necessarily. And I want to log the error to the console. And I'm just going to say error message, whoopsies, error message. That's it. So we're going to put the error message out to the logger as well. All right, and then one other thing, because this is a public string, I do have access to it on the front end, but what I want to do is I want to create a separate method that's going to allow me to access it fairly easily from the front end coding here. Oh, and I almost forgot one last thing. I still want to ultimately, because all code blocks need to return something. So here I'm returning that, and here I'm returning it, and over here I'm throwing the exception, but ultimately I'm not returning anything even if there is an exception. So I'm going to go ahead and add this down here at the bottom, just in the event that it gets to this point. I'm going to return this empty room DTO. So essentially, if I am successful in reaching this endpoint, I won't be for this reason here, but if I am, then it will eventually get down to either here, where I'm going to return an empty room DTO, or I will return all of the rooms that I'm getting from the database. If it manages to get past all of this, then it will still return just an empty room DTO, but it shouldn't get down to here unless something drastically goes wrong. And then, like I said, I want to do one more thing. I want to add a, let's see, I want to add a method that I can get the, the message from. I don't need to because it is public, but I'm going to anyways, just for thoroughness, because I might want to access this elsewhere. So I'm going to say get error message. That looks good. And then I'm just going to say return error message. That works. Okay. So essentially what I can do is I can call this method now and get the error message. So with that, now I need to make a few modifications to my room base so that I can actually get this error message. So I'm going to go to the rooms base here. And let's see, I've got my iRoom service. I've got my IE enumerable of the room DTO. So now I'm going to do a little bit more error checking here. I'm going to say, first of all, public bool, and I'm going to say load failed. And this is going to be for checking, first of all, if the rooms load properly. And then under here, I'm going to say public string, we'll just call it error message. And of course, this will be a get set And just for thoroughness, we're going to call it a string.empty. There we go. All right, and then just like we did before, on the initialized async, I want to add a try catch block because I can do that here as well. So I'm going to say try, and I want to say this right here, rooms.await rooms equals await room service.get rooms. I'm going to try and get the rooms, and then we're going to say if equals rooms, so that means the rooms, if it equals an enumerable dot empty, and that's going to be room DTO. There we go. Enumerable. What did I do wrong here? Let's see. What's going on here? Oh, probably need system dot connections or what have you. No, I shouldn't need that. That's ridiculous. That should be okay. If room equals rooms enumerable. Did I spell it wrong? That's weird. I'm going to go ahead and say that's fine. Oh, I don't want enumerable. That's weird. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. If rooms, comma, enumerable dot empty. I must have spelled it wrong. I do that sometimes. I am not the best speller in the world, so I apologize in advance for that. So there you go. So it is enumerable.empty room DTO. So basically I'm checking to see if the rooms right up here, if it is an enumerable that is empty, i.e. I didn't get anything back, just an empty enumerable, then I'm going to say throw new exception, and I'm going to say load failed. There we go. Then down here I'm going to say catch, and this will be exception EX, just like before. We're going to be catching that exception, and we're going to change the load failed to true, and I'll get to that in just a second about why. And then we'll just say the error message equals EX. Well, actually, no, I don't want to do the EX.message. What I want to do actually is I want to put forth the message to the front that I'm getting from the API. That's going to be a lot more helpful than just simply load failed. So I'm going to say room service, there we go, dot get message. Oh, and where is it? That's poopy. Let's see here. I'm going to finish this statement and then we'll go back and fix it real quick. ex.message. There we go. And then close that off, and then semicolon. Okay, so why is this not showing up? That's kind of weird, right? Oh, let me see. Get error message is what I called it, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Yep, there it is. Get error message. Yeah, that's pretty lame. But why? Oh, probably because of that. So remember we had an iRoom service, and of course that is going to load all of the different methods into the interface for us, or the interface is going to load all of the different methods for us. So I need to make sure that error message is also available here, and so that should clear that up. Boom, just like that. So remember, any methods that you end up adding to your service have to be declared in your interface. Otherwise, none of the other things are going to be able to recognize that they exist. Okay, so now that we've got the base set up, the rooms base, I want to look at the rooms.razor now because there's a few things that I want to add in here. So let's see. I'm going to do a little bit of changing here. Let's up here, instead of if rooms.null, I'm going to say if at load failed. Then what I'm going to do is say, actually, I probably didn't need to delete that. Actually, I'm going to keep that. I'm sorry. I apologize. That was my bad. I'm going to actually just put it up here. If we're going to say at load failed. There we go. And then in here, I'm going to make a div. And again, I will remind you that I am in no way at all a front-end CSS developer in any way. So this is all kind of just a lot of thrashing, I guess you could call it. But I'm going to say text, border, text, color, We're going to say font weight is bold. And I'm going to say, let's see, at error message is going to go right there. So that should work. I'm not sure why these are being weird like that, but they should actually be in there because there's Bootstrap. So it's being silly right now, but text border, yeah. Anyways, so that should work. And then, so what's going to happen here is that if load failed ends up being true, then it's going to display this instead, this H4, which is going to have a border and a color. And, oh, I know why, because I'm being silly over here. So just as a side note, I do have some code on the other screen that I'm kind of looking off of to make sure that I kind of get things right. And I totally forgot about one last thing. We'll come back to this in just a second. Hold, please. But in the process, or in this section here, we're going to leave all of this like that. This all looks good. These are looking good. This is good. Okay, so now what I want to do is, I don't know what these are. That's weird. That is very strange. Oh, there we go. What I want to do is I'm going to add, not in the code, but just above here. There we go. I'm going to add a styling for this. There we go. So we're going to say text dash border. And ideally, you could put this in your CSS file for the room. I think I mentioned that once before. So here we've got rooms.razor, rooms base. You can actually make one more piece of the puzzle by saying add, and we're going to go to just let me see, I think it's new item, and we're just going to call it a, let's see, I think it's got to be rooms.razor.css. There we go. And then that's going to make a CSS file for that particular page, but we don't really need that right now. I'm not worried about that, so I'm actually going to delete that. And see, it's in a weird spot too, so I'm actually just going to delete it because I don't want to deal with it right now. I'll look at that in a future video, but for right now, this will work. What I can do is I can put my CSS styling here in a style tag brace right there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say the border for this text is going to be 2 pixels solid, and we're going to call it red. And then we're going to say the background is red. Yep, that works. Cool. I'm going to say the padding is going to be, we'll say 10 pics and 20 pics. That's pixels for those of you playing along at home. And then display is going to be inline block. And don't worry about all that stuff, what that means. It just is a thing. And then one more thing that I want to add in here, because we have it up here. See, now it says, see, notice my squiggly line went away. That's because I didn't have the styling for it. I was making stuff up. And then text color here has a squiggly, but down here I'm going to say dot text dash color, and that's going to be color is white. There we go. All right. And so now what should happen here is when the rooms base gets loaded, initially on the initialization, it's going to try and get the rooms from the room service, and it's going to head out to the room service. Because we have our error here in the API endpoint, it's not going to be successful. So it's going to kick back a status code of not found. And when it does that, it's going to throw an exception. That exception is going to contain a message that is response.content dash response.status code. That's going to be sent to the catch block. It's going to be saved as the error message string from ex.message. Okay, we're also going to log it into the logger, and I'll show you that too. Then it's going to just return this empty IEnumerable if, you know, it does. Then what will happen is once it returns back to the rooms base, it's going to look at this and say, hey, is the rooms.service.getRooms, is it an empty IEnumerable? And if it is, we're going to throw a new exception that says load failed. That's going to be sent down here to the catch block. The load failed is going to be flipped on to true. And the error message is going to be saved as the roomservice.getErrorMessage dash ex.message. So the message here will be load failed. That's going to show up in the second portion here. And whatever roomservice.getErrorMessage returns is going to show up in this portion right there. So ideally what we should see is response.content dash response.status code. and then dash load failed. And in that process, we're also going to see here up front that message being displayed with a border and a white text color. And yeah, that's what we should see. So let's test that out and see if that actually works. I'm sorry if it was kind of like all over the place, but that is what programming actually is. Sometimes you're just kind of flailing and thrashing about. Even if you have some sort of a plan, it all goes awry. So our API should still be working. No change there. If I go to counter, hey, it worked. There we go. So I've got system.net.http browser HTTP content dash not found dash value cannot be null parameter. Oh, I don't know what that is. That's weird. Value cannot be null parameter logger. I don't think that's what I was actually going for there. I was actually going for this here. So that's kind of strange that it did that, but that's okay. I bet if I remove that, that will remove that bad thing there. But let's see if that was the cause of our error or not. This is also another part of programming, is you do something, you think you know what you've done, and then something goes terribly wrong, and you ask yourself, how did it come to this? And oh, there we go. See, so that was my error there. So we can debug that a little bit later on, but I did promise I was going to show you the logger, so I'm going to do that real quick. And here we go. Should be down in this section somewhere around here. Let's see. Should be, stop it. It should be logs. Oh my gosh, it is just losing its mind. Let me see if I can get the logs going. That's me. API. Actually, it'll probably just be easier if I just go and try and do it again. So hold on one second. I'm going to, right over here. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to say, there we go. And actually, I'm going to reload it. Hold on. I'm going to do that. Reload. Okay, so we got a reload going on here. Cool. And then, let's see. Counter. Huh. I don't know why the logger's not showing up. That's weird. That's annoying. Okay, so that's something else we got to figure out what's going on here. Let's back that out. There we are. All right, so let's look at the rooms service. So what did I say? I said logger.log error message. I did say that. Okay, that looks good. That looks like it's supposed to at least work in that regard. So I'm surprised that the error message is not actually being logged. It's a little bit annoying. I've got iLogger. Let's see, private read-only iLogger room service. Let me, did I do something? Oh, sure. What is that? It says it's never assigned. What's that all about? Initialize field. Oh, duh. I'm so stupid. Okay, so idiot. And check this out. You got to do this. You got to initialize the logger from logger, and you've got to actually inject the iLogger service. That was my mistake. So iLogger, and then it's going to be room service. There we go. And then it's going to be logger. That's it. And, oh, not that. And this is going to be equal to logger. Ugh, what a doofus. Sometimes I amaze myself at how dumb I can actually be, which is fairly dumb, to be honest. You know, it happens. And okay, so let me pull the page up from the other side or from my other monitor. Here we go. All right, so if I'm not mistaken, we should be seeing, let's see, go here. There we go. That's it. Fail. Front-end systems, not found. And look, that is the message that we're getting from our service. And that is the message that is appearing right there in the front. So there you go. So now what you have here, and again, this iLogger thing is actually more for you when you're debugging stuff. So just FYI. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, there's a way to write this to like a text file on like your server. So if you're actually hosting a web application someplace, you can log all of these things also, and you can make those logs maybe even more detailed than just this. Like right now, all we're doing is we're copying the error message to the log, which, you know, is helpful, but at the same time, we're already getting it right there. So it's not really you know, we're not breaking any new ground there. But my point is that the logger can be used to kind of like follow through with more details if you need to. There's a lot more. It's a very powerful tool. So I encourage you to look more deeply into that. Back to our rooms base. Again, that was kind of weird that we're having this issue here. So actually what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here. Now, this is something that has like troubled me for many years. It's been basically this super annoying thing where I try and run breakpoints, and then if I start my program, the breakpoint suddenly becomes hollow with a little yellow triangle over it saying that this breakpoint will never be hit. The reason for that is because for whatever reason, Microsoft has decided that Google Chrome is the best browser to do your debugging in. I disagree wholeheartedly. I like to use Firefox personally, but if you are running Firefox, and I think even Edge doesn't work either. So if you are running either one of those and you're finding that your breakpoints in Blazor WebAssembly in the front aren't working, do yourself a favor, switch your web browser to Google Chrome instead, and it should work just fine. So we're going to take a look at that right here. And I've got a breakpoint set. And for those of you, and this is what it normally looks like on Firefox, but then once Chrome loads it up, I should actually hit the breakpoint. Yep, there it goes. It turns red again. So I'm going to go to my rooms, and then it should, there we go. Perfect. So if you don't know how to use the debugger, I definitely encourage you to learn a little bit more about this. I'm going to give you a real quick crash course. Check it out. So I've got load failed, and if you hover over it, you can see that load failed is equal to false. So that's good news right there. Up here at the top, I've got my controls. If I click on this F11 one, it's going to step into whatever methods are coming up. So in this case, if I like click here, it's going to go to this. And if I, right now it shows the error message as null because, or not null, but empty because the error message doesn't have anything in it. It's been assigned to an empty string right here. All right. But the way it's going to populate the error message is by going to this room service.getErrorMessage. If I were to click this F11 button up here, the step into, it would go to the room service.getErrorMessage for me, and it would basically populate. Yep, it would do the get, and then it should populate the error message with the error message. So I'm going to do that real quick. There we go, get error message, and it's going to return the error message, which is already saved here as that. And so when I come back, one more, there we go. It should get the error message, or there we go, we got the error message there, and then it's going to send it back to where it called it from, and my error message should be populated. I don't know why it's not showing it right now, but oh my gosh, it's like taking forever. Oh, there we go. That's it. And there it is. Okay. And then let's see. I want to look at this EX. That's the reason I did this. System exception, data, inner exception. I want to see what is actually in here if I can find it. Let's see. Values. I don't see anything in here. Interesting. There should be a message. That's it. Load failed. Yeah, that's what that should be. So EX message is load failed. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this real quick, and I'm going to see if I can figure out why it was showing that weird thing. But I have a feeling I think I know why. So I'm going to actually add this in here, and we're going to see if that fixed it. ex.message. There we go. And that is looking not all that great, but that's because I forgot a curly brace, and oh my goodness, I'm just a solid mess right now. Get rid of that. And I'm going to put one there too. There we go. All right, so let's try this one more time. Get rid of that breakpoint. And I'm going to say start. And yeah, again, I encourage you to really explore the debugger in Visual Studio. It is super powerful and relatively easy to use. Explore all those different commands that you got up there. There's more than just the step into code. But anyways, here we go. And there it is. Perfect. And I think I know what the problem was. If you remember correctly, before this didn't say load failed, it said something like logger issue or whatever. That's because we hadn't declared the logger in the room service, because, you know, we're a bunch of doofuses. I say we as if like we're in this together. I mean, we kind of are, but like the fact is I'm leading you here, and I messed up. So that was my bad. But anyways, so that's what we've got. So now what we have is some pretty solid error checking. And this is really cool because when a user gets to this, they can be like, oh, hey, developer dude, or a developer lady or a developer person or whatever, I ran into this problem running the website and it says system.net .net.http.browser http content dash not found dash load failed. Can you tell me what's going on? And you, as a developer who already built all this, can go back and say like, oh, I see, it hit this and it got a not found. I wonder if there's a problem there. And then you can go back and remove that little S there, or actually in more likelihood, if they were hitting that particular error, it's because the API is not running and maybe there's a problem with the server. But either way, you will know where to start the problem, or you'll know where to start the process of problem solving, because you will have an error message that you can work with. But let's make sure we actually fixed our problem here. We go to counter and the room should be loading, and boom, everything is back to the way it is supposed to be, which is pretty cool. So there you go. Hopefully that was super helpful. Hopefully it wasn't too much all over the place and squirrely. I know it can be a little bit frazzling and rattled as I'm trying to do this for you, but I'm going to be honest with you. Like, coding is kind of that way. It makes, I mean, as much as you want to do the SDLC, that's a software developer life cycle, and like put together a big plan, that plan doesn't always come to fruition. Sometimes you're just kind of like flailing and thrashing around. Now, I know there's also better ways to do some of this stuff sometimes too, but this is a nice, quick and dirty introduction into getting what, in my opinion, the most important error messages, those are from the API, to get displayed on the front end for your users. So take this, run with it, do what you will. Next time we meet, I've been working on something new for you that I think is kind of cool. If you have no experience with something called SQL, we're going to be looking at that in a little bit more detail. So there is Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. If you don't have it, I recommend downloading and installing it. It's free, and you can see right here, here's our home furnishings database right here. And of course, this is all of the rooms that we currently have. And if I do that top 1,000 rows, there's my 4 rooms that I've got. Okay, and we're going to look at this a little bit more detail next time, specifically some SQL commands, and then we're going to be doing some stored procedures, and that we're going to call our data that way instead. All right, so it's going to be a little bit more of a process, but it is another way that things can be done and gotten from the database, and probably a more realistic one, because to be honest, a lot of web applications actually just call data from the database using stored procedures. Entity Framework is kind of a newer thing. This whole .NET Core stuff, especially with .NET Core 8, is like newer and like fancier. So if your web app was built from the ground up in the last few years, then you might be looking at something like this. But if you're like me, more likely than not, you'll be looking at a web app that was built 20 years ago that does things kind of the old-fashioned way. But when I say old-fashioned, that doesn't mean worse or bad. It just means different. So I want you to be prepared for that. All right, so with that, hopefully this was helpful and informative. And if not, I apologize. Either way, drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Or don't. That's cool too. Tell your friends and have them subscribe. Or don't. It's not a big deal. I'm not doing this for the subscriptions. I just want to help you as a developer get better. So with that, I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.